Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today has been training in martial arts since his school years. He's traveled the world to train, which led to him winning gold in the first World Pencak Silat Championships in Jakarta in 1982. He founded, published, and edited Australia's first martial arts magazine, Blitz. Subsequently, he's also authored a number of other technical volumes focusing on grappling methodology, as well as a number of other training manuals specifically designed for purpose. He was a pioneer and advocate for cross-training at least a decade before the idea became popular, and in 1988, he became the first BJJ black belt in Australia. He's been in constant demand as a trainer in Australia and internationally, as evidenced by his 100-plus seminars he's delivered every year for the last 2 decades. He currently resides in Geelong, Victoria, where he and his wife have established their academy known as Redcat Academy. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. John Will. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, Brian. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Hey, I appreciate it. It seems like probably my last 5, 6, 7 guests have all been in other parts of the world, so it's always a challenge getting that scheduled with the time difference. So I appreciate your flexibility with that.
I can't work it out. Add 6 hours minus a day. Yeah, it's complicated.
I know.
Where's the app?
It's great. It is. I always got to look it up when I have I guess in the country. I'm like, all right, what's the current time? So then I know, all right, we're 6 hours apart. We're 11 hours apart. We're 4 hours apart. We're 5 hours.
Well, 143 hours from now, we'll meet. Like that's the
pretty much. You're the second person I've talked to in the last week who's a day ahead of me. So it's Saturday for you, which is and Friday for me. So you're in the future. So you can you can tell me the winning lottery numbers, and I can do this for a living. There we go. Well, what we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I mentioned you've been doing this since you were in school, but I want to know what led to that. Where did that first interest come from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey?
I think, my story is not unusual. I guess I was a bit of a loner at school. My dad moved around a lot. He was a policeman, so he was, being stationed at different spots. So we moved, and therefore I was always the new kid in school during those formative years, and always halfway through the year when the pecking order had already been established. So, being on the receiving end of a bit of bullying, I guess, my father taught me, some basics of how to throw a good punch and deal with it. And that's how that's what started it. Okay. And then my dad in his library had a few books, old books on, he had a lot of weird books like, philosophy, which was weird back then. Talking about 50, 60 years ago, books on philosophy and how to play chess and books on strategy, books on Marcus Aurelius, all kinds of weird stuff. So I used to just read books because there was no internet back then. Mm-hmm. And some of his books were, judo and jiu-jitsu. So I just read everything in his library, and those books kind of sparked my interest. And and I started my first ever martial art was wrestling. I started wrestling, not like we don't have a wrestling program in Australia where I live.
Oh,
like you do in America in school.
Okay.
We don't have that, but we did have, I was lucky enough to live in a town where the Olympic medalist lived. And so he was teaching wrestling, coaching wrestling in a local hall. And so I went there twice a week and started wrestling. So wrestling was my first thing when I was maybe 12 years old, something like that.
Wow. And how long did you do that?
A couple of years, maybe two years.
Okay.
And then I broke my leg.
Ooh.
So that stopped me. And then when I was recovering from that, I was trying to do rehab for my leg at the age of like 14 or something. And then I took up Taekwondo. What was it? Gojukai karate. And then later on Taekwondo to as part of that rehab, and I kind of enjoyed that. And that was about the same time as the Bruce Lee movies hit, so no special story. And then, who doesn't want to throw a kick in a fight?
Yeah.
So that led me down the, the martial arts path. And
the Goju, was that an actual school then that you were going to?
Yeah, Goju Kai, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
there was, back in those days, Brian, there was no such thing as a professional martial arts school. There was just twice a week in the local ambulance hall or school hall or something, and that was it. And and then I read some books. I read one of the books I read when I was maybe 16 at school was Don Draeger. I'm sure you've heard of Don Draeger.
Yep.
And he inspired me. So I decided to, when I finished school at 17, to follow in his footsteps, go over to Asia and train all through Indonesia, Thailand, India, China, Japan. And I did that for years. So in
the Goju and the Taekwondo school, did you ever get involved in competition, or did they not have tournaments over there at the time?
Yeah, I got in. I did some Taekwondo competition.
Okay.
Yeah, and did okay. Yeah, won a few of those.
Do you remember your very first tournament you entered?
Yeah, I do.
What happened the very first time, and what belt were you?
I forget the belts in Taekwondo. It was so long ago.
Okay.
But I think I was a red belt.
Okay.
Is that the one before black?
I know it varies from system, but in the system I do it as red is right before black. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's another lie. It's 8 lives ago. 8 lives. And so I was a red belt, and I went in and I remember I won the final with a left-legged spinning hook kick, which was weird. Like,
wow.
I couldn't do it now. My life depended on it.
Wow.
Left leg. What the hell was I thinking? But, it was all fun. It was all nice. And I loved everything martial arts. And then, now I'm, my whole view is very different. It's changed a lot over the years, but it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So at the age of 17, when you decided you were going to travel the world to train in martial arts, what did your parents think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they must have been freaked out because I had no aspirations of, becoming an engineer or doing anything sensible. I just wanted to follow my passion, and I didn't have a plan, and I just figured it'll work out, and I know it's bad advice, but I still kind of believe that as long as you're reasonably intelligent,
mm-hmm.
you can figure out a way to monetize your passion, right?
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is. And even if you don't make a whole lot of money, you'll be happy. And I think that's important. So they were freaked out, and I was disappearing into Asia and getting into all kinds of trouble and coming home with wounds and stab wounds and this and that. And my mother must have just been out of her fucking mind. Yeah, I survived. And in the end, I've ended up making a great living, an interesting and unimaginable living out of this crazy thing that you and I both enjoy, which is pretty cool.
So when you were traveling like that, what are a few of the styles that you got to train in, and roughly how long did you stay in each place when you were traveling?
Well, I trained in my first stop. For those who don't know the geography, of an American audience might
mm-hmm.
not realize that Australia is it's Asia. I mean, we're in Asia,
mm-hmm.
and the nearest country is Indonesia, which is only an hour flight from the northernmost tip of Australia. So it's really, Asia's, Indonesia's our Mexico or Canada, depending on where you are. And so it's easy to get there and inexpensive to get there. So, and inexpensive when you're there.
Mm-hmm.
So like Mexico, I guess, it'd be like that, going from California to Mexico. So it's pretty easy. And that's where I started. And that, Brian, that was the book that fascinated me the most of all of Don Draeger's books.
Mm-hmm.
Don Draeger he was in the Marine Corps, if I'm not mistaken, for America, was stationed in Japan and took up an interest in Budo, Bujitsu, and trained. And then he trained all over Asia. But the book, I think what he was most fascinated in, as is evidenced by his books, and his writings, is Southeast Asia. All the amount of the diversification of martial arts and combative systems in Indonesia is astounding. Like back in those days, there was literally around 500 different styles in Indonesia.
Wow.
Village to village, they each had their own thing. And, and some of them were all kicking, some of them were all hands, some of them were weapons, some of them were mixed, some of them were grappling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like incredibly diverse. So no wonder Drago got stuck there, like I did,
Mm-hmm.
for like 7 years. I was
wow. Okay.
there, not there. I mean, I was there, coming back home, getting some money, going back,
Yeah.
back and forth, not 100 times, but maybe 20 or 30 times. So that's where I hung out, and that's where I kind of grew up, I guess. Like between when you're 17 and 25, you're in a really formative part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I grew up, if it can ever be said that I did grow up.
I know what that's like. Nice. So that many different styles, do a lot of those styles still exist, or are they some of the ones that were like, this family only, or this village, and it disappeared when they died off?
There's a lot of that,
Wow,
but I mainly got stuck into a style called Bhakti Nagara, which is a Balinese. Bali is an island in Indonesia, and that was the strongest style in Bali, with several 100,000 practitioners, a lot of people.
Wow. Okay.
Mostly kids, but of course, there's a bunch of adults as well. But the Balinese team used to always win an outsized proportion of the gold medals when they had the national championships for a long time, and then they had their first inaugural world championships in 1982. And I was a part of the team for that, the Balinese team, not the Australian team. Right. And and that style was very much like more of a mixed martial arts approach. We kicked, punched, elbowed, kneed, did bad work, did road work, and we grappled and did weaponry. So it was a really good, I don't know what you'd call it, like a Jeet Kune Do-y approach, right?
Okay.
And that appealed to me back then because it was the most holistic approach in those days. We're talking about the mid-'70s,
mm-hmm.
The late 70s and early 80s. So that was fun for me.
Okay. So after the 7 years there, what was next on your journey?
Malaysia, Thailand.
Oh, nice.
Muay Thai, and then later on India, where I did some wrestling and some Vajramushti, which is it's dead now. You can't find that anymore. But the last remnants of Vajramushti, which is pure grappling with a knuckle duster on one hand.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, that's one of the most fascinating styles I've ever seen. And the last remaining practitioner of that. There was a family that did it for 1,500-year history. So
wow.
Amazing. And I've written about that, and there was an old book I've got that was published 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one of those books.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so I found that, and I did some training with that, only for a couple of weeks, but it was amazing. They had all kinds of ground stuff, but with the wrestlers with knuckle dusters, they were hardcore. Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
And did you spend as long at any of those places as you did in Indonesia, or was that your longest?
No.
Okay.
No, Indonesia was my foundation.
Okay.
That's where I spent most of my time, enough to learn the language and be able to speak Indonesian and stuff like that. And then Japan and a bit in China, Taiwan, and then I think, what was it, 1982, I finished my training in Indonesia. When I say finished, I got a black belt.
Okay.
I won their world championships, which is no big deal, really. There was only 14 countries, but nevertheless, I won that. And so I thought that, I've got as much out of this as I can. And I don't mean that in any way other than, I think it had run its course in my mind. And then I started to be much more into trying to up my standards a bit. So I went to America, where everyone goes to get better at anything. Really.
Who did you first seek out when you went to America?
I went to the Jet Center, Benny Urquidez.
Nice. That's cool.
And, because he was so amazing. And him, Pete Cunningham, and trained there for a little bit. And there was a fellow Australian, Stan Longanides, who was Stan the Man, who was a world champion at that time.
Okay.
Kickboxer. And he was an Aussie. And we became good friends. And so I was training there a little bit, and that's where I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the same time.
And who was the first person you learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from?
Well, I had no choice. At that time, it's Horian Gracie.
Okay.
In his garage.
Nice.
Because that was in 1986. And yeah, Horian was teaching out of his garage. And I went over there and I did 5 private lessons with him.
Wow.
And used up all my money because it was like expensive.
Yeah.
I think it was, I'm not sure, but it might have been $100 a lesson or something.
Wow. That's a lot.
And in 1986.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. That was all my money. I couldn't even afford the 5. I could only afford 4, and that would wipe me out financially. So I borrowed some money off Stan Longanides, and some friends just chipped in $20, $10, and I made the 500 to do the 5 lesson package with Horian, which is, yeah, that was my start.
Wow.
Awesome.
What was your first thoughts on your first time seeing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu compared to other martial arts you had studied over the last so many years?
I mistakenly thought, because I'd done some wrestling, that I got this. This is kind of,
Yep.
It's just a small part of the whole package, and I only want to do it to improve my ground game, let's just say, because all the fights I got into in Southeast Asia, working undercover for the police and I was doing all kinds of shit. And a lot of fights, I don't want to spit out a statistic that's based on nothing, but it seemed that most fights would end up in a clinch of some, unless you knocked the guy out, right? Cleanly knocked him out, things were going to end up in a clinch. And so I thought, well, I got to improve that side of my game. So, but I've done wrestling. It can't be that hard. And then I just, found out that this is impossible. Like, just getting squished by someone on the ground. And those 5 lessons that I did, thanks to Horian, who I think actually most people, not even just the jiu-jitsu community, but most professional martial arts schools, many of them at least owe him a debt of gratitude, because he started the UFC, which brought eyeballs on the whole thing, and then schools sprouted up everywhere, and even Taekwondo schools and Tai Chi schools probably benefited from that. So he wouldn't be my first choice as a mentor, but I think he shifted the axis of the martial arts in the world almost more than any other human being ever. So
I would agree.
I thank him. I thank him for that. And I have thanked him. I've written him a letter and said, look, you might not even remember me, but thank you so much, for giving us all a living and, and all of that. And he was gracious enough to write back and say, John, I remember you, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, Horian,
that's cool.
That was really, really interesting for me to do that.
Okay. And then, so after the 5 lessons, what was next after that?
What was next? I had no money, so I had to come back to Australia to earn more money to get back. And I came home, and following in the Gracie idea, I just decided to find as many karate black belts or taekwondo black belts, Japanese jiu-jitsu black belts, judo black belts, like everyone I could find, and say, look, let's spar, and then using my 5 lessons worth of jiu-jitsu, I would just take them down with some of my wrestling and then towel them up on the ground and went, I should do 10 lessons. Like, this is really good. Like, so then I saved up, and at that time I had a magazine called Blitz, which is an Australian martial arts magazine, because I started that 2 years prior.
Okay.
So I interviewed Horian, and I'd spread the word in Australia about the efficacy of jiu-jitsu. And no one believed it. Like, they couldn't, what are you talking about? Everyone thought that was just the same as Japanese jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu, right? And so it didn't kick off. And this was way before the UFC. This was in 1987 now. So. Okay. But I wrote some articles about it. And then I decided, I'm going to go to Brazil, because I can't afford to train with Horian. And because I didn't have much money. My magazine was really only making pocket money. It was making enough to barely cobble a living together. Okay. I was only selling 10,000 issues in Australia, but it was enough to pay some bills and pay the rent. That's about it. Okay. So I decided I'll go to Brazil and I'll do some more stories for the magazine. And I on the 5th lesson with Horian, on my first visit with Horian, he couldn't teach me on my 5th lesson because he was taking his kids to Disneyland for the day. So he got his nephew, Hegan Machado, to teach me. And Hegan was 18 years old at the time. He'd brought him up from Brazil. He was national champion down there, 18 or 19. So Hegan taught me my 5th lesson. And him and I really hit it off, even though he didn't speak one word of English, because he was seriously passionate. And passion knows passion. And it just worked. And I thought, that's the best lesson ever. So I went back And I went to Horian's place to book one more lesson. And when I was there, I booked one more lesson with the intention of getting some addresses in Brazil, so I'd go down there and train. And that lesson that I booked the second visit over was with Hegan again. And he said, no, trainee, I'm going to Brazil Wednesday. Come with me. And I went, that's exactly what I want to do. So I went with Hegan down to Brazil, and we've become best mates, best friends ever since. And so that's how I kind of got into jiu-jitsu.
That's kind of cool. You mentioned the magazine. What led to that? What made you, did you have any kind of journalism background? What made you decide to launch a magazine?
There was a previous magazine called Australasian Fighting Arts, and I wrote a story about mixed martial arts I'm just doing the math. It must have been 1985 or 86, 85, I would say. And then I wrote an article, and then they published it. And then a couple of the big knobs, like friends of the editor, well-known martial artists in Australia. One was a Jeet Kune Do guy, one was a Kung Fu guy. They wrote a response to my article, damning me. What the hell would I know about cross-training and, who am I to be writing an article like that? They wrote this article. And so I wrote a reply. And there was, in those days, there was a little thing at the front of the magazine or the back where, people wrote in little letters to the magazine, and then the editor could respond, which was kind of cool. And so they were damning me, So I wrote back a response to their response, and I thought it was pretty good. And the publisher refused to publish it.
Really?
And that really pissed me off. And then I just said, I'm going to put this magazine out of business. I was an overreactor in those days.
I love it.
So I did that. And next thing I went down to a local publishing house and said, how much to make a magazine? I'm going to write my response in my own magazine. And then they said, it's going to cost you $10,000 to print 10,000 copies. And I went, okay, got in my car, drove around all over Victoria and New South Wales, 2 states in Australia, and tried to sell martial arts schools and stores advertising space in my magazine. Once I'd sold $10,000 worth of ads or got the promise for that, I knew I could do the magazine, and I did it, got the money so that all the sales would then profit. And it took me 10 issues to put them out of business.
Wow. So you launched it out of spite. I love it.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So awesome.
And once they were out of business, I'd lost interest, and so I gave the magazine away.
You gave it away?
Yeah, I gave it away. I just gave it to a friend who was really interested in publishing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Have you ever, since then, regretted giving it away and wishing you would have stuck with it?
Oh, no. I did what I needed to do. And, and he did something with it that I wouldn't have done. He published another magazine on golf and soccer and then gym and fitness. And then he ended up publishing like 20 or 30 magazines and then buying a printer and making a big building and then employing 30 people. And so he grew it. I would never have done that.
Okay. Does he still run it, or does someone else run it now?
No, actually it folded about 3 years ago. The whole publishing thing folded, everywhere and all over the world, it's digital now. So that the age of digital stuff, that killed that business. So yeah, it folded, and he's moved on to doing other things. He's a very good friend of mine, Silvio Morelli, lovely guy.
Okay.
He employed a lot of people, and he did really well with that magazine, much better than what I would have ever done.
Nice. At what age, at what style, what belt level did you first get involved in the teaching side of martial arts? What drew you to that?
Well, I was teaching prior to jiu-jitsu. I was teaching, I was a black belt in this style of Silat Bhakti Nagara. Okay. And my school, I was teaching from probably 1980 onwards.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I started incorporating jiu-jitsu just naturally into the training, because my school was more, you would think of it now along the lines of a Jeet Kune Do school, right?
Yeah.
So meaning mixed everything, and whatever works next minute, you're teaching it in the next class. So that's kind of what I was doing. So it was a pretty easy transition. And then I just did grappling. And then as I slowly learnt more and went up the ranks in jiu-jitsu, I teach more and more jiu-jitsu until I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu, which was in 1987. Is that right? No, 1997. And then, 4 or 5 years after the UFC. And then it was from that point on really a jiu-jitsu school with some combatives at the front end of it for when people who really wanted to learn how to defend themselves in the street.
So the school you currently run then, Redcat, is that primarily BJJ with other stuff mixed in?
Oh, well, it's not mixed in. They're all jiu-jitsu classes, but we have a combatives class.
Oh, okay.
When someone comes to my school, their first 3 months in my school is a mixture of, there are 4 basic ground drills that we do that really are preparing people for my jiu-jitsu classes.
Okay.
So they do those, and then they do some fence work, preemptive striking, some basic elbows, knees, headbutts, some pre-fight management stuff, and some takedowns. So like a mixed martial arts combatives idea at the start. So that's what everyone does that comes in my school before they get into BJJ.
Okay. So think back to that first time you started teaching way back in 1980 to now. What do you think has changed about your teaching style over the years?
Oh, my God. I mean, as much has changed about my teaching style that has changed about my talking style or thinking style. I mean,
okay.
I've taught, I used to track it. I don't track it now, but I've taught probably more than 28,000 classes.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
So, and I've taught probably, I think 2,860 something seminars.
Wow.
Which I was tracking for a while. Mm-hmm. And so when you do that much teaching and you're interested in teaching, then you're going to do comparative analysis, whether you want to or not, on the way you taught, a single leg run the pipe or high crotch, or the way you taught a round kick or a headbutt last week, and then you teach it again this week, and then you say the words in a different order and you get a different outcome. I mean, you're going to track all that. And I've always debriefed myself after every single class. So I've taken notes. And so, my teaching styles evolved and improved in a myriad of ways.
Okay.
Over the years.
Nice. That's very cool. So you mentioned too, some of the styles that you through your travels were like weapons based. What's your favorite weapon to train with?
Well, I don't do any weaponry anymore.
No. Okay.
I used to like the sai. You would call it a sai.
Yep.
It's called a trisula or a cabang, depending on the country you're in. But I used to like that staff or the bow, toya, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Way back. This is way back. I used to like those things, and knife. I used to just knife work because everyone has a knife in Asia.
Nice.
So those kind of things were interesting to me. But I did it. I didn't want to do it.
Oh, okay.
I was forced to do it as part of the training, so I had to do it. It wasn't a choice for me. I had to do it.
Nice. And what about your, obviously you had the magazine that you published so many episodes and wrote some articles there. What about your book? What led to you writing your first book?
My first books were instructional for jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
Because there was no books and there was no internet, virtually no internet. Hang on, that's not right.
Yeah.
The internet started about the same time as the UFC, which is why it all worked. So they were jiu-jitsu books, just a fundamental jiu-jitsu books of, the most basic 28 things in jiu-jitsu and some basic drills. That was my first book.
Okay.
And then I wrote 2 other jiu-jitsu books, The Guard and then Advanced BJJ. This is way back. There was no other books or anything, so that was kind of cool. And then later on, I wrote a series of books. I designed some curriculums, which is how I made a decent proportion of my living over the years, doing training design and curricular design for, military and policing, law enforcement over in your country as well. And
okay.
Agency work. So I've done that. So that's my jam, designing training models. So I kind of always liked that anyway. That's why I wrote the books, really, because I kind of just liked that, and there was no other way to do it before I got all this other work. So and then I wrote some books which are autobiographical in nature. Not that I thought my life was worth reading about, but I had a lot of people asking me, what's the most important lesson you've ever learned, life lesson, blah, blah, blah. And then I started making a list. And then I learned, I compiled a list of the 60 most important things I've ever learned.
Okay.
And then I thought I'll just do them in chronological order. And then that's code for an autobiography. Right. So it accidentally was an autobiographical account of how I learned all these things. And and I published that, and bunch of people bought it.
Was that the Rogue Black Belt, or was that something else?
Yeah,
okay,
that's it.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I wrote. There's 3 of those. People still buy them.
I was just looking at them; they look interesting. So,
yeah.
Any plans on any future books, or?
Like no, I don't. But I should write. I've had hundreds of people asking me just to write one more.
Okay.
Like, that just covers off the last 10 years. Yeah. And what I've learned since. And I do think I've got some things to share with people. So maybe one day I'll do it.
I hope so. I really do. I'll be looking for it. Talk a little bit about your school. Talk about the Redcat Academy. Kind of what led to you starting that? And
well, that was just a natural evolution, of me having always had an academy. So that's we have a good school. It's it's a full-time school in that I rent the building full-time in the center of town, but we're only there 5 nights a week.
Okay.
And I'm only there 4 nights out of the 5. So I've always wanted to have a school where it doesn't feel like a job. So I only teach Monday to Thursday. Someone else teaches the Friday night class. There's open mats on Saturday. So I'm there 4 nights a week from 6 till 8. But at the same time, it's got 230, 240 students.
Wow.
So, it gives me and my wife, well, I'm retired financially now, but have been for a while, but it gave my wife and I, a full-time income.
Okay.
From doing 8 hours a week. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you get to make money doing something you love, so that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, well, between the school gave us 2 incomes, and then my work outside that with law enforcement and curriculum training design gave me another income, and then seminars would give me another 2 incomes. So all of that together was really, really good.
And are you still traveling as much as you have been, or has that slowed down at all? Or
no, I've decided. COVID, there was a few things, but COVID was the gun to head slowdown. We couldn't travel. We couldn't in our country. Australia was really draconian with their response to COVID. I mean, they basically shut us down for a year.
Yeah.
Like you can't leave your house shut down that level.
Wow.
In our state, at least, it was really bad. So that was like awesome. My wife just loved it. She said, this is fantastic. We've never had this time off. We could eat at 6 o'clock at night. What's that about? Do romantic walks. It was all this kind of shit.
Nice.
At night, because you're not allowed out of your house. So we had to, so it was that forced a stop to everything. And then we just said, well, let's just retire now because we could financially retire. So we just did that. Now we just do what we do for love and purely for love, not to make money.
Okay.
But I was doing 120 odd seminars a year for probably 25 years.
Wow.
Which is a lot. So,
and
the seminars were awesome. I mean, I just did one on Friday because it was a really good friend of mine up in Canberra, another state of Australia. But I only do it now for really, for people I've known for a very long time. It's very hard to say no to them. So that's the reason, not for making money anymore. So we've gone from 120 down to maybe 20 a year or 10 for fun, 20 a year, something like that. Okay. Not many. So I've really cut way back. I mean, we're off to Europe on Wednesday for 5 weeks.
Nice.
I do a few seminars at the start of that for some very good friends, and then I'll have 4.5 weeks off holiday.
So out of those 120 you were doing, how many of those were out of Australia? Most of them? Or?
No, it was a lot in this, probably maybe 20, 35.
Okay.
35.
Not bad.
40 outside of Australia, and then maybe 30, maybe a third outside of Australia, a third inside Australia, and then a third of like for defensive tactics for law enforcement, military, and other government agencies.
Nice. Very cool.
Which is all very different.
Yeah, I know you talked a little bit about MMA and stuff, and I mean you were kind of there when it started, and you knew the Gracies and the Machados when they were starting that thing. So, as a fan of MMA, which do you prefer as a fan? The original, first 5-10 events when there were very little rules, or what it's become now?
Oh no! Those original days, they were awesome. I mean, it was popcorn. It was a popcorn freak show, and. Who didn't love that?
I loved it. I loved it.
It was so fun, and it was like knowing jiu-jitsu. When that first happened, I was a purple belt. So it was like having a superpower, and it was like you knew something that no one else knew.
Yeah.
And so those exciting days I mean, it's still okay now, but I wouldn't watch it. I can't tell you the last UFC I watched. Unless it's some really weird fight that, that would be super interesting for me. I'd have to know both people and watch it, but I haven't watched it I honestly can't tell you the last one I watched.
Yeah, it's probably been 10 years since I've sat and watched a full UFC event myself.
Yeah, I'm probably the same, Brian. I don't know. I'm more interested in a very technical things and a breakdown and analysis. So I'd much rather watch a high-level grappling event, the finals of the ADCC or one of the other grappling shows, Polaris or something, Fight to Win, where I know both guys and I'm really interested. That to me is much more fun to watch. But then I might watch something on, on one championship where you're getting, a great Muay Thai fight one championship is much more interesting to me now, where they've got two super high-level guys grappling, two super high-level guys Muay Thai, two super high-level guys MMA. Yeah, that's much more fun for me to watch.
I would agree. Do you still compete at all or no?
Oh my God. No, I don't. I mean, life is enough of a competition, I guess. And I've never really been interested in competition.
Okay.
I've been much more interested in coaching and teaching, which is a completely different pathway.
Yeah.
I remember the day that Hegan and he says, our brothers were going to talk to you. We want to have a meeting with you tomorrow before training. Come early. And I thought, shit, I'm in trouble. In those days, we were always in trouble. There was little challenge matches breaking out. There was all kinds of shit going on. So I thought, I'm in trouble. So I turned up at the mat and they sat down, the Machado brothers and me, and Hegan said, we want you to answer this question. I said, what? And he said, do you want to be the best competitor you can be, like train for a world championship? Or do you want to be the best coach you can be? Which pathway do you want to go? And I said, if I have to pick. And he goes, yeah. I thought about it. I said, well, I forget how old I was. I was in my early 30s or something. So I just said, well, not world championship. No, coach, best coach. And he said, okay, looked at his brother and said, we've got to teach him everything.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, holy shit, like what if I had answered, competitor? And, I asked that question later on. He said, we would have just worked on your game. You got a really good way to pass the guard. You got this best sweep from the guard, and you got a way to finish when you pass in one good takedown. And you would have just drilled that 10,000 times, just keep drilling the shit out of it and make it unstoppable.
Nice.
So I'm glad I chose the coaching path, which was much more a broad pathway. And so I've never really been super interested in competition. I've just been interested in teaching and enjoying and exploring.
That's cool. So did you get to work much with Carlos
Machado?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, now in those early days, they were all together in Brazil.
Okay.
And then when they came up to America, Carlos then went over to Texas because Chuck Norris was in LA. And then Carlos became his personal coach. Yeah, Chuck's a lovely guy. He's no wonder he's well loved by the American populace. He's just such a down-to-earth person. I was teaching him one day on the mat in LA, teaching some private lessons to him and Howard Jackson. And the door opened up and these two kids walk in. I'd forgotten to lock the door, right? And they both went, oh, you're Chuck Norris. He invited them onto the mat.
Wow.
And pulled him into the lesson. I mean, what a guy, right? He's so cool.
I've never met him. Met him yet.
Sorry,
He's on my dream list to meet someday, hopefully.
He's lovely. Just a genuine, authentic human being. But he ended up moving to Texas where he bought a ranch and Carlos went over there with him. So Carlos then set up in Texas.
Okay.
He's over in Dallas now.
Yeah. I'm actually going to be interviewing Carlos soon. I gotta schedule the date. As soon as he lets me know his available dates, I'll be interviewing Carlos. So
you'll love him. Carlos is such a wonderful guy and he could speak perfect English. And one of the few when I first went to Brazil that could speak English down in Brazil. Okay. So he helped me down there, because he could translate and talk to me and communicate with me and I couldn't speak Portuguese. But Carlos is a very smart guy, very interesting, very well-read. He reads a lot of books, philosophy, history, and, ask him about his eidetic memory. So he's got a skill for remembering every single thing he reads.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So he's lovely. You'll really enjoy it. And
nice.
He's he would be one of the most interesting people to talk to about jiu-jitsu and martial arts on the face of the planet.
Okay.
because not only has he lived it authentically from the beginning, and he's come from the very heart of jiu-jitsu, but he can express his thoughts and articulate that really well. So that's unusual. You'll love it.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I know I think you know quite a few of my former guests, at least. I know you obviously David's the one who put us in touch, and I know I interviewed Richard Norton last year, which was a lot of fun. So a few of your friends I've had on the show, which is kind of cool. David
Meyer, he's one of the nicest people on the planet. He's influenced me a lot. I've influenced him with the jiu-jitsu, but I taught him his first lesson. It was nice. But he's influenced me from just his, he is one of the most empathetic, lovely, caring, moral, ethical people you'll ever come across.
That's cool.
And so he influenced me in those ways. I'm a better human being for having known David. Yeah, I love David to death. Him and I are very close friends. He's coming over. Well, he's coming over to hang out with me for a week or so.
Nice.
With the week I get back from Europe, so we can both be jet lagged together.
That'll be fun. I've never been to Australia. That's another place on my bucket list. Hopefully, when our last kid's out of the house next year, so hopefully we can do some traveling.
Well, yeah, it's great. You'll like Australia, and I say that because almost every American that I've known that's come here loves Australia. So we're like Canadians, but different.
Much cooler accent than the Canadians too, that's for sure.
Well, we don't have an accent, Brian. What is wrong with
it? Of course not. All right, so in all your years of martial arts, is there one philosophy you've learned that is at the top of your list?
Oh my goodness, no, there's lots.
Maybe a couple that stand out.
Well, I think attention to detail, paying attention to detail is something that separates. That's a real separator. People that can learn to pay attention to detail tend to do way better than people who find that difficult. And that's something that, if you go to Japan, for example, and you say, what's different about the culture of Japan? That stands out to me. You'll have the gardener, and that gardener will be paying attention to detail at the same level that a heart surgeon will be paying attention to detail in the Western world. So I think that's really important, paying attention to detail. That's a real watershed concept.
Okay.
For going to next level of anything. So that's something I've learned from the martial arts. Another thing, process, isn't it? So process, everything's a process. If you want to make $10 million, it's a process. It's not hard. It's just a process. And if you put enough steps in it between zero, paper run, and $10,000 property investment and crypto or whatever you want, if you put enough steps in there, then everyone can follow that pathway. If you put enough steps in a ladder from the ground to the top of your house, your grandmother can climb up that ladder. But if you take half the steps out, then only fit people can do it. If you take 3/4 of the steps out, then only freaks of nature can get up there.
Yep.
And I think with a lot of the martial arts and with learning in training, instructors that don't know much, will you go, here's the technique, and they show the technique without breaking it down into its 8 steps. And if you break it down into its 8 steps and then optimize the order of those 8 steps, then everyone can copy it. Everyone can do any one of those steps is eminently achievable by anyone. And so then you walk the 8 steps, then you stitch them all together, and then you've got the move. And the only thing that's better than 8 steps is 10.
Okay.
Process. So process, is something that I've learned over the years. Prioritization, optimization.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a whole bunch of like Taekwondo, right? So you're about the Taekwondo, and you tell me, John, here's if I said to you, all Taekwondo is not equal. All the Taekwondo techniques are not equally effective. And you would probably agree with that. And there'll be a little back fist, and there'll be some bullshit in there that's completely not effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you Pareto principle it out. The Pareto principle?
Yep.
80-20 rule. You'll 80-20 it out. You'll say, okay, out of all of Taekwondo's techniques, there'll be 20% of the techniques that will provide 80% of the effectiveness to the extent that it's effective. Most of your effectiveness is just going to come from 20% of the techniques.
Right.
So you get those 20% of the techniques, and now you've got a very small subset of techniques to teach. But then you do it again. You say, well, okay, out of those 20% of the techniques, what's the most effective out of them? And then you're going to come down to 2 techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep doing that until you get to one technique. And then what you've got is an order. So if you only had 10 minutes with someone, you know what to teach, that one technique. And if you had half an hour, you teach the next subset up. And then an hour, the next subset up, and until you're able to prioritize, because people don't tend to prioritize a lot. They just randomly pick shit. But that's not how engineering works.
Right.
We don't bring people to college and randomly open the engineering book and start anywhere. No, there's a reason and a thesis as to why you start with chapter 1, page 1.
Right.
And so there's an optimal order. So there is an optimal order for everything. And I didn't learn that from martial arts. I've come to realize that in martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've learned all these things, optimal prioritization order, optimal sequencing, the value of process, attention to detail, optimizing details, like prioritizing details, which details are more important than other details, and then getting all that. And then I've realized that if I apply that in this part of martial arts, i.e. stand-up, you can also apply it in groundwork. Or actually, it was the other way around. Okay. Groundwork, I could apply that back to the stand-up. And if I could apply it to stand-up, I could apply it to takedowns. So, that's right. If I learn something somewhere, I can apply it somewhere else. And then you figure out, if you're on this path, that you can apply everything you've learned to areas outside of your martial arts. So why would you be doing all that within your martial art training and not doing it with your investments training or your home ownership plan or your fly fishing or your anything? So, as Miyamoto Musashi once said, to know one thing is to know 10,000 things.
Right.
And I think that's what he meant. So that's, almost everything that I've discovered that's useful, I've discovered in my martial art training, but then tried to take it off the mat or out of the dojo and gym into other aspects of my life.
I like it. So I know you said you didn't do a lot of competition, but training, competition, anything, your worst martial arts related injury?
I've had 8 or 9 operations. So I'm trying to figure out which one's worse.
Wow.
The worst one would be, the worst one was a knee. It was actually not jiu-jitsu. It was way back in the day. You imagine like throwing a spinning hook kick, right?
Yep.
But when you do that at ground level, imagine that technique, like you drop down and spin around at ground level with your leg and knock him up in the air.
Yep. Yeah. We call it a sweeping backspin is what we call it.
Sweeping backspin, right? So that idea, I did that once to a guy and I put him in the air, mate, and when you do it really well, especially if you time it off when they're throwing a kick, they go horizontal.
Yep.
They go up in the air. So he went horizontal and I'd stopped the spin. Ooh. So I was sitting there with my leg stretched right out at floor level and he fell down on my leg sideways.
Ow. And
that basically spat my cartilage out, medial cartilage, like it just ripped it. So I got it all taken out. And that was way back in the day where they didn't do scopes, arthroscopies. They just opened your leg up and ripped the whole fucking thing out.
Yeah.
So that was the worst one, that I was in plaster. In those days when they did that, you were in plaster for 4 months.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it was a pretty serious operation.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I've had other things since, but they're so good. Medicines, lots of things have improved the last 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, including medicine. So nowadays you go in there and on a Friday morning, you're out Friday afternoon, you're wrestling a week later.
That is true. That is very
way
true.
Better.
That's one reason I've been putting off my knee surgery for 30 years because the longer I wait, the easier it'll be.
The easier, and also you're in America. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, over here, that shit's free.
Yeah.
And I can't believe, I'm no socialist. I'm no communist.
Yeah.
But I'm no communist. But I apparently I am a socialist and I didn't know. Like I actually thought I was a capitalist. And then Dave Meyer pointed out, John, you have free health care. And I go, yeah, but so what? He goes, that's not capitalist. What are you talking about? And he goes, no, we don't have that. Like, yes, I believe in free education and free healthcare. I do believe. So I guess I am a socialist.
Yep. Well, there you
I'm
go.
a lefty. I didn't even know it.
Nice. That's why we're getting along so well.
Right.
There we go. Nice. All right. I got a few fun questions to wrap up the interview. Now, this one, being from Australia, I got to ask, do you know what Mount Rushmore is in the United States?
Yes.
So what I ask people is, who are 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Oh, gee. Well, I'd like to say the Machado brothers collectively.
Nice.
But, that's, if I only had to pick one, and it's not for any other reason than it's the one that I've spent most time with. He comes out, we holiday every year together. Higan Machado is the person who I holiday with. He comes here for his holiday. We spend a couple of hours. We go to Bali, we go to Indonesia, we go to India, we fuck around together.
Nice.
So it's Higan. But all of the brothers were, they were all really, so those guys. I would have to add in Horian Gracie.
Yeah.
Because of what he's done for everybody.
Yep.
I mean, it's just sad that he's struggled with his kids and this and that. I do feel for him, and I wouldn't choose him personally, is my personality, but wow, he's like, he's done as much or more than Jigoro Kano.
Yeah.
If you ask me. Put Jigoro Kano there while I'm on it. No, so
nice.
Jigoro Kano, Horian Gracie, this has got a grappling bias. Apologies for this.
That's okay.
Machado's. I put Dave Meyer there because he's just the best human you'll ever meet. I put Kaio Terra there for being just a grappling genius, technically amazing, ultra lightweight killing machine. Benny the Jet.
Yes, nice.
Stick him up there because he's just inspirational and he's amazing. Jeff Thompson, do you know who that is?
I know the name. I've never talked to him, but
Jeff Thompson is a guy who wrote a book called Fear. Yes. He wrote a book called Watch My Back. Watch My Back. Read the novel, which is based on his life, Watch My Back. He transformed. He's the first guy that put his hand up and said, I'm scared, when no other martial artist was saying that. And he goes, but here's how I use it. And he talked about his 300 and something fights as a bouncer in the roughest town, in the roughest nightclub, in the roughest town in the UK, which is rough anyway.
Yeah.
And he talks about his strategy for winning fights and how he does it, having a fence, getting off preemptive shots, how to do that really well, and all about fear management. He is owed a debt by a lot of people. He's hard to find now. He's just disappeared. But yeah, Jeff Thompson, I'd stick him there.
Okay.
Okay. Or there are other in the agency operational space, but then they shall go unnamed. So put one or two blank faces up there.
Okay.
Put a balaclava on them if it makes you feel good. My wife, Melissa, this is a very personal Mount Rushmore. My wife, she to me is such an inspirational woman. She's a martial artist. I met her. She had multiple black belts. She won the first Pan American Jiu-Jitsu Championship. Won by submission with every fight. But she is just she's a mix of like a Dave Meyer, Heart of Gold killer. So she's probably the most inspirational person for me, but that just sounds weird because it's my wife, but I'd stick her up there as well. She'd be the first one.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Oh, that's plenty. No, that's a good Mount Rushmore.
Sorry, so. It's a mountain range.
No, that's okay. That's okay. All right. I know you'd say you weren't really into competition, but let's say you were to fight in the UFC. What would your walk-up music be as you're walking into the cage? What song would be playing?
Yikes. It'd be something probably, I might play for fun. I might play Lady Gaga.
Yeah. Nice.
Something funny. Something like that. Yeah. Why not?
That'd be good.
Macho. Something Lady Gaga-ish. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
There
you go. I think I said Weird Al one time when someone asked me that. So it could be fun, but all right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Martial arts book?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's not many that are really good. Book of Five Rings.
Nice.
That's not a martial. It's it's a book of strategy.
Yeah, but a lot of my guests have picked it though, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, that book, that's a book that, you don't read that book, you study that book and you go back and reread it every couple of years because you're going to change every couple of years and then you're going to see it through different eyes.
Yeah.
So you're going to keep pulling stuff out of there, thinking that someone rewrote the book when you weren't looking. So I'd pick that one and a way back, Tale of Jeet Kune Do.
Yes, Bruce Lee. Yep, great book.
Yeah, it sounds corny saying Bruce Lee, but
a lot of people pick that one too, so that's okay.
I don't think he'd stand up today.
Yeah.
The average blue belt would wreck him. But I still think that inspirationally, but that was unfair to say that. But what I mean by that is, any surgeon nowadays compared to a surgeon 40 years ago, any engineer now compared to 40, we've all got the benefit of standing on these people's shoulders. This is the benefit we have. And it's sometimes hard to imagine how extraordinarily fortunate we are, to be able to build on top of these people. So Tale of Jeet Kune Do and Book of Five Rings.
Okay. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Yikes. They were all good, but I used to like the corny ones, like Man from U.N.C.L.E. and
nice.
The Avengers and I mean, you wouldn't call them martial arts show, but it was the whole thing. That's Modesty Blaze. I used to like those kind of things.
Okay.
Not the hiya, not the.
That's okay. That's okay. All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
I don't want to say Enter the Dragon because it's everyone's favorite one.
Mine's The Karate Kid. I actually
God.
Enter the Dragon's like number 2. Karate Kid's the reason I got involved in martial arts. So
that's why, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why Enter the Dragon would be. I mean,
exactly.
Everyone came out of that theater in my town and just started street fighting. I was from a Detroit-ish kind of town.
Yeah.
So, we just did it. We walked out and people were fighting all over So Enter the Dragon, I don't know, martial arts. I think I'm going to have to go with, what was the name, Brian, of the movie, that Circle of Iron? Bruce Lee wrote it.
Oh, yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
The Silent Flute or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it? Corny, but I like the idea of it. Not the martial arts action. I mean, put that to one side, but it's the idea of the journey and the different things, and whatever that was called was awesome.
Yeah.
I apologize.
I think you're talking about Circle of Iron. That sounds right. 1978, because that is.
Yeah, I think it's called the Silent Flute. But then someone renamed it. Yep. It's got a couple of names, and it might be the Circle of Iron.
Yep. Yeah. David Carradine was in it, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll go with that one.
Yep, that is the one. God, I need to. I haven't watched that in probably 30 years. I need to pull it out and watch it again. So
no, me too.
Nice. All right. Final question. Doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen. Favorite movie fight scene.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go with just the latest one because I've got the memory of a goldfish. Dune.
Oh, nice.
I'm a sci-fi fan.
Okay.
So I just love, Denis Villeneuve's Dune. I mean, it's just amazing. And there's a fight scene in there. I mean, there's more than one fight scene in there. So I'd say it's not so much that fight scene. It's the whole atmospherics and the whole thing is just awesome. But Dune.
I need to watch it. I saw the original when it first came out, and I've never watched the new one, so I need to.
You are a heathen. You heathen.
It's on my list. I will watch it.
Okay.
I just went to 2 nights ago. Went to the 30th anniversary showing of The Crow. It played in town here.
Wow.
Yeah, so brought my daughter to see it for the first time, and she loved it. So it was fun.
Hey, a guy that might be nice for you to interview sometime.
Yeah.
If you haven't already, Nathan Leviton. Have you heard that name?
I've heard the name, but no, I have not.
Nathan Leviton is the guy who runs Leicester Shoot Fighters in England. So he is well known all throughout England as being an excellent coach. He's just a lovely guy, Nathan Leviton.
Okay.
And why I mention Nathan is because he's a super fan of movies and movie nights and movie weirdnesses and theater. Cool. So he runs several big theater things throughout the year in Leicester over in England, where people all come dressed up as this and that. And you would connect with him and with your theater/movie things.
Okay.
Check out Nathan.
Cool.
I'll be teaching him in another 6 days. So I might, if I can remember, I'll tell him maybe he can expect you to.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'll shoot you a email and remind you. So that'd be kind of cool.
Do that. I'll connect you to, because he's a really interesting guy, very smart guy, and a great martial artist, fantastic coach. But he's got I think his favorite thing is movies. And
Nice.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will check it out for sure. Well, before I let you go, is there anything that I forgot to ask you or anything we want to get out there quickly before we wrap it up?
No, I'm good. I just answer questions. I don't offer things.
Well, that's okay too. I like people who answer questions. They make for good guests. So
no worries.
Cool.
Well, thanks very much, Ryan, for having me on.
Hey, thank you. It's been a blast. I've loved learning more about you, and I can't wait to get the episode out.
Roger that. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.